Welcome to the Science of Kindness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Culver, and I'm so grateful that you've joined us today. We share real stories and give you tips, tricks, and strategies to fit kindness into your life. Enjoy and know that you are a bright light in this world. Hey friends, and welcome back to the Science of Kindness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Culver, and I want to start today with something that a lot of people have heard. And maybe you even heard it recently, maybe you heard it growing up, maybe you've heard it more times than you can count on your fingers and your toes. But what if you've heard this before? You're too sensitive. And if you've ever been told that, you probably didn't hear it as neutral. Or heck, it might have been even direct, right? Maybe you heard it as, you need to toughen up. Maybe you heard it as, you're overreacting. Maybe you heard it as, you are the problem. Or better yet, friends, how many of us grew up hearing the things like I did? I brought you into this world, I'm going to take you out of this world. Now, mind you, there was some profanity inserted within some of those statements for me. Or I'll give you something to cry about, right? Especially in those moments where we were crying, we were navigating our emotion. And over time, we begin to believe those words because our brain believes what we repeat over and over and over again. So we begin to not only feel this and internalize it, but we also begin to feel like what we feel is wrong and what we feel in that moment is problematic. So many of us were taught to suppress our emotions rather than feeling them, right? Now, some of us, we might have felt all the emotions, but regardless, it doesn't mean that we were told in that moment with expressing the emotion that we were too sensitive or not. It could have looked as those other examples as we talked about. The reality is, I want you to think about the last time someone said that to you, right? You're too sensitive, or you're showing too many emotions, or you need to toughen up, or you're overreacting. What was happening in that moment that someone said that to you? What did you feel in that moment as someone was saying that to you? What did you do next in that moment when it was said to you? And the most important question I have to ask you out of all these is, what did you tell yourself in that moment when that was said to you? Because friend, I want to offer you a different perspective. I really don't believe that you're too sensitive. I believe in those moments where we have emotions, they are signposts, they are signals. That means that you are paying attention to what you need. That means that you are noticing tone. That means you're noticing energy. You're noticing body language, you're noticing inconsistency, and you're noticing if actions align with words or if words are just words, right? We always know the adage to be true, actions speak louder than words. So in that time that you might have been told that you're too much, you're too sensitive, you're too emotional, right? Maybe you were picking up on things that others chose to ignore or dismiss. And in many environments, that awareness is not welcomed because it's not safe, right? I think back to environments in which I would ask questions or I would push back on things, and they would challenge me to say, why would you do this? Why would you say that? And immediately I could feel an emotional response. And then if I would begin to feel how I express how I'm feeling or navigate that emotion, it's, you're too emotional, you're too sensitive. And that's not true. The reality is, in that moment, I was experiencing things based on the environment that was not safe. And so I was in a fight or flight response, and I was trying to figure that out, right? So sensitivity is often awareness that hasn't been validated. When someone has an emotion that's opposite of joy, we have to help them navigate the full emotion. We don't want to say, get over it, stop crying, calm down. I'll give you something to cry about. I brought you into this world. I'll take you out of this world, right? Because all of this ties to our nervous system. Is our nervous system saying I'm safe, or is our nervous system saying that this is a threat and I need to respond? Because our brain cannot discern between a physical threat or something we tell ourselves or what someone else says about us that we've internalized. Because our nervous system is more responsive than we think. That means our nervous system can process emotional information faster. It notices subtle changes, and it changes the more deeply we feel. That's not a flaw. That is a wiring that we all have as human beings. But here's the problem. When that sensitivity exists in environments that feel super unsafe, that becomes overwhelming. And the brain is constantly scanning, asking, is this okay? Am I safe? Is this person going to be consistent, right? And it's not that you feel too much. It's that your environment is giving you too much to process and particularly may have too much pressure, which begins to impact relationships, which impacts trust, and ultimately impacts your work or your environment, right? I don't want to say it's just work-based. It could be your environment. Again, at home, with your loved ones, in a faith-based space. It could be at volunteering, in your community, at the park, right? All of this matters because when our brain does not feel safe, we automatically respond in a fight or flight response. And as I shared in the last episode, my natural response is to kerosene and blow the whole place up. But that is not healthy for myself, for other people, with working with a team. And so I've had to work on that over the years. But the reality is when we feel too much and we don't feel like we can express our true, authentic selves, it impacts our world around us, our energy, everything that we do. So let's apply it in 3 different world experiences and talk what this may look like. At work, for example, maybe you notice tension in meetings, right? Or maybe when you notice when things are not being said or things are not being addressed, or one thing's being said behind the closed doors, but it's not being said in an open space, right? Think about when you're having interactions with colleagues in a meeting or at work respectively, and you can see the tone of voice change. You can see the energy change. Or what about unspoken conflict? Or my favorite, what about favoritism, right? When some people have clear expectations one way, but if somebody else did the exact same thing, there are different expectations and repercussions for them. Again, sending a flight or flight to our nervous system. And I want to highlight that there is a healthy level of conflict. But what is not healthy, and I was sharing this last week when I was training with a leadership group, what is not healthy is cussing, slamming things, throwing things, hollering and screaming, right? This emotional response, we go back to kindergarten tantrums because of our response. We have to regulate ourselves because if that's the response that you have in a respective space, guess what? You're sending everybody else into their nervous system fight or flight and no one feels safe. They're going back and their brain is constantly scanning, is this safe? And sure, in those respective spaces, if you're looking for tension, if you're scanning for tone of voice, if you're looking for body language, if you're looking for energy, people may say to you, hey, you're reading way too much into this. But later, when they're exhausted, they're stressed out, and they're noticing the exact same things, they come back to you and say, you know what? You were right. So let me be clear to you. Your nervous system is a pulse check. Your emotions are signposts. Your emotions are guardrails. They're telling you what to feel in the moment. So do not ignore them. Now, make sure it's safe enough in the space to communicate what you're feeling and what you're experiencing because all that matters, right? And that comes down to trust. And I've said this before on this podcast that trust is foundational to any relationship. For without trust, the relationship means absolutely nothing. So when you're navigating a relationship and something feels off, or communication changes, or connection shifts, or energy fades, you silence yourself because you don't want to be too much. And I think we have to remind ourselves that it's not that you're being too much. You're silencing yourself because at the core, the relationship does not feel safe. Right? I think about the honeymoon phase of relationships, particularly friendships, right? It's really exciting, lots of hanging out, all those things happen. And then when there's a moment of conflict, that decides everything. Is it handled with care or is it handled with conflict? Is it handled with honesty or is it handled with comfort? Because both of those things matter. If you discern was comfort over honesty, right? You're being nice and not being kind. When communication changes, and you don't get clarity and you start to internalize things in your mind, that impacts the relationship because you're filling in the white noise with the information that you do have. And when these things happen, we tell ourselves, if I shift, if I shrink, if I don't worry about what I'm feeling or what I'm sensing in the moment, then I won't be too much. I won't be a bother. I won't be a distraction. I won't be these things. And then we begin to rewrite our brain to say, I should be calmer. I should be this. But if you remember from several episodes ago, when we use the word should, we're sending the same threat response to our brain as physical danger. So we have to think back. Where did this come from, right? And oftentimes it stems way back to when we were the ones who felt really deeply in really hard moments. And we were told, you want something to cry about? right? So now we hold on to that same understanding that we can't express emotions or be, I don't even want to use the word sensitive, but we can't understand our emotions or live our emotions because of that experience. Maybe we were the ones who always noticed things, right? A change of behavior, change of tone, change of energy, and we brought it up. There were repercussions. Or maybe we were the ones who reacted emotionally and we were told exactly that. You're too emotional. You're too sensitive. Rather than being guided through the inquiry of curiosity of like, why am I feeling this way? What's going on? What are these things trying to tell me? I've been labeled now as too much, right? Team too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too caring, too this. But the reality is, when we don't have that clarity, then we're sitting in a space of what do I even do? I think back to when I worked with a really toxic leader. And when we had really hard moments, the leader's response was to do exactly what I just said not to do. Throw things, shut down, cuss, yell, slam doors. And for me personally, this triggered all the way back to my childhood because that was an emotional response of someone who was in my home in moments of hardships. And I'm grateful to share that's not how they respond now, but that's how they did then, right? And so I want to be really clear. It is okay that when we have emotional moments that we cry, we express the emotions, we might get angry, we might get frustrated. But I also want to be clear that when we are navigating really hard moments and we are the leader or we're the one who are in charge that has to deliver this information, we got to hold it together, right? We can't be in front of a team or in front of a group just bawling, trying to communicate what's going on. So what I want to be clear is the emotion of crying is okay, right? Being upset, that being an emotional response is okay. But be mindful about when you're trying to navigate a culture or a climate or an energy, you're looking for people to assimilate to the same thing. We can't be up there blubbering trying to communicate what's going on, right? So hold it together, but then make sure you honor yourself, you're kind to yourself, and you include yourself in the equation to ensure that you navigate that emotion that you have. Because if you ignore that emotion, if you suppress these emotions, if you go back to, I brought you into this world, I'll give you something to cry about, right? Get over yourself, throw some dirt on it, those old adages, then this emotion is going to show up as some kind of physical pain in your leg, in your back, in your arm, in your neck, right? All of this matters. And so we cannot label ourselves as too emotional or too sensitive. We have to ask ourselves through that lens of inquiry, what is this trying to teach me? So let's pause here for just a moment. I want you to take a deep breath in through your nose and a deep breath out through your mouth. Notice your body. Where did you have tension? For me, even being vulnerable right here in the podcast with you, I felt some tension in my chest. I felt some tension in my shoulders. And I think it's because maybe I'm being really honest about some hard moments that I wasn't honest in that moment, right? So as we took that breath, as you notice your tension, where have you been told that you are too sensitive? Where have you been told that you're too emotional? And what were you actually noticing in that moment? Was there a change in energy? Was there a change in tone? Was there a change in body language? Because sometimes when we begin to sense things and we feel things, and friends, I'll be vulnerable. I've had this conversation where I'm like, man, I feel this, I think this. And I'm like, am I crazy, right? Am I the only one who's thinking this? I share this because when I've talked to other people within the respective team, I'm like, am I noticing this, right? Other people affirm. And it's easy when you're navigating life with some narcissists, you know exactly what I'm talking about, that we begin to internalize it ourselves. But here's the truth. You are not the problem. The problem is not your sensitivity. The problem is not your emotions. The problem is not any of the things. The problem is the environment. And when you are in an environment, whether it be work, home, life, right? Apply it anywhere, and that environment's dismiss you, ignore you, or invalidate what you're feeling, then oftentimes it points to misalignment, lack of safety, lack of belonging, lack of trust. And to be honest with you, it could stem to a lot of unspoken tension. I think back when I was an assistant principal working under a principal, and I think I mentioned it on this podcast before, that individual was a mix of Satan and Hitler. So we called her Shitler. And really, when we were not able to be honest about what we were feeling in those really hard moments that we felt like we were walking on eggshells, it was because of misalignment. We did not have alignment to what their vision was and what our workload was. We also had a lack of safety because we never knew how someone was going to respond. We never knew if we were truly walking on eggshells or how that individual was going to react to ideas or suggestions. And there was so much unspoken tension of this essence of them versus us, right? Or we versus them. And we know that when we're in that kind of environment, it's impacting our nervous system, that we are not regulated to respond in an appropriate way that's healthy and helpful for ourselves and for other people. So I share that because sensitivity and emotions are never the problem. As I mentioned throughout this episode over and over again, emotions and sensitivity are often the signal. And kindness, right? Got to get our kindness piece in here. Kindness helps us use sensitivity well, not as to absorb everything, but to understand. Because kindness says, I'm noticing something. Let me get curious, not overwhelmed by everything else. So instead of internalizing those stories, instead of filling in the white blanks, instead of telling ourselves all these things, you observe. You're looking around, you're scanning. And instead of shutting down, right, and ignoring everything, you clarify. You have the space to ask questions and to engage in such a manner. Instead of overreacting and blowing up and spiraling out of control and sending messages and doing all these things, you respond intentionally and you say, what's true right now and what can I manage right now? Because it's easy to be super defensive. But the reality is when we are curious, we clarify and we respond with intentionality. We not only change the energy in which we're operating, but we have the opportunity to impact the environment that we're sitting in. Now, let me be mindful and say it again. If you are vulnerable in these spaces and it's not received well, oftentimes that's not on you. That's on the environment because it's not safe, and the individual that's hearing you or individuals that's hearing you are often defensive, right? So again, be mindful that if that's the space, you want to be kind to yourself. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back an episode. I just talked about this on the last one. But there were many times where I worked in spaces, not just as a school leader, but even when I was first working, where tension was incredibly high. I think back when I worked at a bank specifically when I was in college. We had just gone through a management shift where we had lost our key manager and we got a new leader. And there was a lot of tension because one of our internal employees was promoted to a leadership position, but didn't really have training to understand what that looked like. And so they were on a micromanaging power trip. And so when we asked a question for clarity to say, hey, this is a new process or this has changed under your leadership, which is fine, we were met with defensiveness. We were met with pushback as in like, are you questioning my authority? Are you questioning who I am? Are you questioning what I'm trying to create right here in the space? And 99% of the time that wasn't true. We were seeking to understand and make sure that we were in compliance to create safety for ourselves. And so where I struggled, because I told you, my natural response is to blow it up. And I don't know that working through college and not having all the emotional regulation that I have now, then I didn't probably respond the most calmly and compassionately and caringly, right? And I learned from that. And I share that because sometimes it may have looked one way several months ago or years ago, but it looks totally different now. The reality is when we are aware that something feels off and we engage in curiosity to seek clarity, we often form a connection with ourselves, our internal dialogue, but ultimately we are aiming to create connection with other individuals to create safety. Because as I've said over and over and over again, we are meant to work in pairs or in tribes or in groups, and we're looking for connection. But at the core, we can't connect until we feel like we belong, to be seen, heard, valued, and respected. And that comes from the ability and the opportunity to be aware, to be curious in that, and then to clarify, this is what I'm feeling and this is what I'm understanding, so that we can foster that connection. So the next time someone asks you or says to you, you're too sensitive, you're too emotional, I want you to ask, what am I noticing right now in this space? What might this be telling me? And then, do I even feel safe here? Because Once you answer those questions, you're able to identify what is a grounded response for me. If you've ever been told that you're too sensitive, you're too emotional, you're too this, you're too that, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not broken. You are aware. You are aware of what feels, and that is okay. And when you are aware and have that sort of awareness, and you parallel that with the kindness that we've been talking about on this podcast, guess what? That awareness is not a weakness, friend. That awareness is wisdom. And when we have wisdom, it can change everything. I think we're so confused that kindness is something that we give, but in reality, even in moments like this that we're discussing, kindness is something that we live. And when we choose it, we change our energy, we change our brain, and we ultimately change the environments around us, collectively impacting the world, which is the ripple effect. So many of us are working in spaces where we're probably like me, where I was looking for somebody else to be the light, to step up and say, here's the solution. But what I realized all these years later is in those moments, there wasn't a light. And so I was being forced to be the light. And so I will always say this, and I mean it to my core. If you can't find the light, be the light. And oftentimes the light you're looking for is the one that you carry on the inside. You're not too emotional. You're not too sensitive. You're exactly what the world needs. So keep being you. We need your gifts. We need your values. And I hope that you believe that because I believe it to my core about you. And I need you to believe it too so that we can benefit from all that you bring to the space. I have loved our time together on this episode, as always. If this resonated with you, let us know. We are always making sure that this content lands to help you not just feel good, but have applicable strategies that you can apply to your real world. And friend, if any of this content resonates with you enough that you think of somebody else, please share it with them because that's the way we get the message out. And make sure you're subscribed and following along because we're always putting out new content around the science of kindness and not that kindergarten kindness, but real, deep, intentional kindness that elevates our understanding that allows us to show up as the best versions of ourselves. Friend, I will see you in the next episode, but I want you to know that I am always rooting for you and I love you. I'll see you soon, and I hope you continue to spread the message of kindness.
The Science of Kindness podcast is hosted by Dr. Chris Culver. Our executive producer is Jake Doberens. This podcast was created in conjunction with Theophany Media.